Hello, welcome back to part 2 of our mini series around managing mooting and other stressful things. I'm Dr. Judy, and if you haven't joined us for the last couple of sessions, go back and watch our 35-minute introduction and overview where we learn to think like a lawyer, and part 1 where we looked at high energy, high stakes situation and managing stress and emotions. Those first 2 videos, about 45 minutes to an hour of content, will provide you with everything you need to know to be ready to settle into conflict, communication issues, and problem solving, which are inevitable when we are working on important projects, when we're collaborating with peers, or in partnerships in professional or work environments. So let's dive into part 2. We'll be together here for another 20-25 minutes and take a look at what we have to learn about managing conflict and working with others. In this section, I'm going to talk to you about problems and separating problems from people. I want to talk to you a little bit about drama and how to stay out of drama. That's going to be the conduit to problems. Subscribing to drama can create many problems where they don't need to be. So we will work together to learn a little bit about that, as well as talking about boundaries and big emotions that get in the way of resolution, aka problem solving. So let's dive right in here today and start with this notion of problems, not people. What I want you to remember here is that when we have problems, we want to depersonalize from them and see them as being what they are, problems. They are an entity of themselves. They are not necessarily related to people, or what I mean to say is people are not problems. So when we're problem solving, I don't want you to approach it from an attack on yourself or another person. I want you to approach it as an attack on the problem. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by that. First things first, behaviors that people tend to exhibit when there are problems are symptoms of problems that we want to be aware of and approach with care and caution. I'm going to get to that when I talk about the 6 C's of collaborative problem solving, but I want you to recognize in yourself and in others behaviors that present when there are problems. So I might be behaving in a manner that shows frustration, that shows irritability. I might be mad. I might be upset. I might be saying or doing things that incite further conflict, aka some drama. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a separate component here in a minute. But I just want you to recognize the types of behaviors that show up in you and others that are symptoms of problems, and know that those are the things that come out when there is a problem bubbling at the surface. The problem is what we want to get to. We want to avoid staying out of attacking the symptoms, because that's going to escalate the problem. We will be triggered. We can become defended. We can become oppositional when we don't see the behaviors as a symptom of the problem. So to niggle down and get right at understanding problems and what they are, first of all, a problem emerges when there's a difficulty meeting one or more person's expectations. Now, I can have a problem when I set myself up with expectations and I don't fulfill them for myself. I can have a problem when someone else sets expectations for me and I can't reach that bar or that level. And we can have problems when we are trying to collaborate and we can't align expectations. So if we know that expectations are often at the root of problems, we can recognize that we can align and adjust our expectations so we can get along better and get the job done when we're working with different kinds of people. The other thing I want you to remember is that when it comes to problems, it's not personal necessarily. So when a problem presents, it can incite a reaction in me. That reaction can exhibit itself as a behavior, which is a symptom of a problem. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's who I am. That is just me reacting to something. So if I'm going to approach problem solving with someone else who also might be in reaction, what we want to do is avoid this dual reactive sense and create further problems, further smokescreen, further drama. We want to respond wisely to the problem versus reacting and to each other and making it personal. So we can stay out of taking things personally by assuming the best. So the problem is the problem, not the person. And what I want to do is take the position of the most general interpretation of how this person is doing in this given situation. And I'm there to support them, and we're there together to attack the problem. And that's it, not attack each other. So, as an example of this, if I am working with someone who often shows up late to meetings or misses meetings, or just generally does things that I interpret initially as them wasting my time or not respecting me or respecting my time, I can take that very personally. I can become triggered, and then I become part of the problem, right? If I make the most generous interpretation of what's happening, I separate the problem from the person, and I maybe assume that A, they're doing their best, B, they could have been people pleasing and just saying yes to all of the suggested times I said to meet, but they really couldn't meet at those times. That's going to lead to a situation we want to support with good boundaries. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment as well. But if I go in with the most general or generous, interpretation and assume the best of the person and then approach them with curiosity and questions, we keep missing each other. We set the time for Thursdays at 5 o'clock. You never make it, or you're always late. Is there a reason for that, or any way that we can make a change as to what we're doing to support you so that we can get this done? I know that you want to be successful in this endeavor, as do I. I just want to find a point of alignment, and I'm just going to assume the best from you. And that most generous interpretation is going to lower the stress level of everyone involved, bring everybody online so they can be in that part of their brain that is thinking wisely and able to respond. And if we assume or make all of these assumptions in the column here, then we can be in the best position to support or approach collaborative problem solving with what I call the 6 C's of CPS. Now, collaborative problem solving in and of itself comes from the work of Ross Green and Stuart Ablom, who have worked together to come up with a framework for CPS. And this is just my take on that framework in terms of 6 sequential steps that someone can take to support problem solving if you have conflict with a partner or a group. So the first stage or step is to connect with empathy. So empathize with the person and the issue. And again, that helps us to approach it with the most generous interpretation. This person isn't out to get me. There's just something getting in the way of us being able to work together. I'm going to seek to understand that through connection. And if I do that, I'm going to have the best ability to have open, honest, transparent communication. And when I do that, I'm going to communicate my concerns. The person, again, is not the problem here. The concern or the problem is the problem. So I'm going to stay focused on that. And we're going to work towards finding some solutions through collaboration. So I might invite the person to collaborate with me or provide solutions. So if every time we've planned to meet, the person has shown up unprepared, then I'm going to say, I know that you want to do as well on this assignment as I do. There's that most generous interpretation. What do you think is the best way for us to get there? How many times a week do you think we can meet? What are the best times for you to meet and gather with me so we can get the job done? The next thing I'm going to do is remember that it's important to be caring and kind in the entire process. So Brene Brown says, clear is kind. The golden rule is do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And so having those thoughts and those actions guiding us can just support good, even constructive communication. So we can go into the next couple of phases, which essentially are carry on and continue. So make plans. I always say reset and forget, or forget and reset, so that we can just continue with some calmness. We're back online and in that thinking part of the brain in a state that is not in alarm or fear or worry or chaos. We're kind of back into that calm zone, and we can clearly move through approaching and attacking the further future problems that come our way. So, a few things are inevitable, that life, just like stress, is full of problems. It's human nature for us to butt heads with others, see things differently, have different expectations of ourselves, kind of coming full circle to what I started with there. But that's not a people problem. That's just a problem. And I want you to think about that, be able to separate a little bit from that, and see if you can't flow through these 6 C's and approach problems neutrally and in a way that's not triggering or harmful to other people. That would be the ultimate goal. However, I want to talk a little bit about if that problem turns into drama and becomes something that's harmful, which can also happen when human beings are working and gathering together. So we have something that we use to describe this in the world of conflict resolution and management, and it's called the drama triangle. Now, the drama triangle helps to highlight that there are typically at least 3 different roles or hats being worn when there is a problem. And these 3 hats can be worn by 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, or hundreds of thousands of people. You can see drama playing itself out during a provincial election, for example. You can also see it playing itself out on some of your favorite TV shows or dramas, in your families, in your groups of friends. You're going to see this everywhere. And I invite you to kind of look for it and analyze it a little bit as you're learning about stepping out of drama and trying to support yourself proactively and professionally to be a good problem solver. So in all drama circles, whenever there are problems and they kind of get a good foothold, we're going to have people who are victims of this circumstance. The poor me, I work so hard, I always show up. We're going to have rescuers. We might have BFFs or people watching what's happening, or people we're talking to about the situation. And they're saying, oh, let me help you. I have all kinds of ideas. I know how to solve this problem. And then we're also going to have the types of people that are persecutors, that maybe they come alongside us and they, remind us to point fingers and it's all their fault, or it's all so-and-so's fault. And what these 3 roles do is they all distract from the actual problem at hand. They get in the way and they increase the drama. They often give us dopamine. Drama can be a major source of dopamine. We get caught up in gossip and we get fired up about our anger or our platform or our stance, and that can be a dopamine, and it can become addictive. And really what happens is we go around and around and around. It's like around and around and around she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. It's just going to go on like this until somebody pulls out of the drama and says, look, we need some perspective here, because drama is driven by shame and blame and ego. Sometimes trauma, our past experiences, come and get fired up during drama. Certainly, it can create a lot of guilt and just feelings like we're not really getting to any solutions. And so when this is happening, I want you to think about for yourself, what are the signs that you might be caught in a drama triangle? What kind of language is being used? Is it problem-focused language, or is it problem-solving focused language? And the difference is, if it's problem-solving focused, we're going to have empowerment happening. Now, the empowerment triangle looks quite different from the drama triangle. We don't have a victim, or we don't have any victims, any persecutors, any rescuers. We have people who have a shared goal, which, if you recognize you're in some drama in a school project, chances are you do have a shared goal, and that's a place for alignment. And what we want to do, instead of getting into shaming and blaming and victimizing, is get curious. Like, what's happening here, and who's responsible for what, and how can we show up for each other? Now, in order to do this, sometimes we need time and space and breathing room. Other times we just need open, honest, transparent communication. Sometimes a good old sense of humor or someone who's funny can, break the ice in drama and stress and help to create the space for problem solving. But what I always say is there are a few questions in this curiosity portion of the empowerment triangle that we want to make sure we're asking that can further help give us distance from that drama mess that we're going around in if we're caught up in the drama triangle. So the questions we want to ask ourselves are, what are you feeling? Or conversely, what am I feeling? This is an awareness phase. What's happening here and how do people feel in the context? What do you need or what do I need? So that's recognizing that there are some feelings, some emotions, some stress. What do we need to do here to make things better? I might need to be heard. I might need someone to show up in a different way. I might need more support. I have to be able to name that need in order to communicate it and have a conversation about it. And you want to practice this in any context that you can outside of high stakes environments so that you're prepared to ask these questions and support each other. And then the final question is, how can I show up? How can I help? How can you help? What can we do to actually work this problem and come to a solution? We get very fired up with emotion, and that's natural. We're going to end up in drama triangles quite often. I mean, I know a lot about it, and it still happens to me and my family, and sometimes in groups of colleagues, and we get all caught up in the drama. But the sooner someone can pull back from that and start asking the questions that are going to lead to us getting or finding some responsibility, some roles back to the goals of the project, and just be curious and supportive of one another, the better. So I hope that helps you to think about or provide some awareness about how problems can become drama and how we can recognize when we're caught up in drama, separate from that, get back in line with what the actual goal is, and move through problem solving. Now, other times we end up in drama because we have an inability to set boundaries and we struggle to negotiate our goals and our roles. So I want to talk a little bit about boundary setting. I have 4 kind of main key components to boundary setting, and then I want to share with you a reflective opportunity if you'd like to pause and reflect. So when it comes to boundaries, the first rule of thumb seems very obvious, but we often forget to do it as human beings, and that is figure out where limits need to be set. What is the boundary? What needs to be defined and or changed in terms of our approach or our needs? Then we communicate the boundary. That's the second piece. And I always say there is the B&A of boundary setting, which is when you communicate your boundaries, be brief, neutral, and action-oriented. That helps us to be clear, assertive, and then leaves room for maybe some negotiation. And I'll talk about that in a minute with regards to firm and fair. So I'll give an example of brief, neutral, and action-oriented. The brief part is we don't want to fill the air with words. We don't want to start piling on excuses, reasons, rationale. All of that stuff gets cloudy and confusing. If you have a boundary, just be very brief about what it is. I cannot meet in the evenings. So throughout the scope of this project, evenings are off the table. That is brief and clear. The neutral part is adding some component that still shows that you care or there's a neutral stance and it has nothing to do with anybody in the group. So throughout the scope of this project, I can't meet in the evenings because I'm in charge of the kids Monday to Friday. That's brief, that's neutral. It is what it is. The last piece is so very important. As humans, we want to attach on to what actions we can take versus be hung up on actions we can't take. When walls go up, we get really frustrated and we become stuck. So when someone's communicating a boundary, if they can leave us with an action or some direction we can go in after they lay down the boundary, we're more apt to be okay with that and know what to do. That's key. So the action-oriented part is, so I started out brief and neutral. I can't meet evenings throughout the scope of this project because I have responsibilities at night. I can meet weekends. That's it. It's 2 or 3 sentences long, and then you leave it for the other person to respond back to the boundary. I always say, a lot of problems come up with boundaries because we either lean too far in one direction or the other in terms of being too rigid or too loose in our boundaries. So they're meaningless or they're so firm that there's no room to negotiate. We want to have a little bit of flexibility, even though boundaries should be firm and fair. If you have that flexibility, you can massage or negotiate a little bit better. And the final component with setting boundaries is another obvious component: prepare for pushback. Most humans are going to push back on boundaries because we don't like having limits set, and we struggle in the places where we disagree. So if I'm preparing to set a boundary, I'm going to prepare or go into it knowing the other person is probably going to push back on that. And I need to decide on what is my line. When I decide on the line, again, being firm and fair is important. That's called being assertive. So sometimes we confuse being assertive with being aggressive. Being firm and fair, aka assertive, is not aggressive, but we want to be careful not to be passive and get walked all over. We want to be careful not to be aggressive and be too mean or overbearing or complicated. And we want to avoid at all costs the worst of the two, passive aggressive, that combination that becomes very, very toxic. And that will land us in a drama triangle, guaranteed. So if we can just be assertive, follow the BNA of boundary setting, subscribe to Clear is Kind, and move through that and negotiate our limits and the scope of what we can do and the capacity we have for different things with others, then we'll be better off if we've got good communication around that. This last piece, I'm just going to bring it up and invite you to screenshot it. If you are the kind of person who finds yourself in or would describe yourself as a yes person or a people pleaser. So I am kind of like this sometimes, and I've had to do a lot of work around this. These are some things that I would invite you to write down and just reflect on or journal about if you would describe yourself as a yes person. This comes from the work of Gabor Mate, and he's done a lot of work in trauma and boundaries and neurodiversity, mental health in general. And so I've kind of taken his framing and applied it here as some questions you can ask to stay out of those shitty first drafts, as I mentioned in a couple of other videos, or those negative narratives that weigh us down. And sometimes that comes from me always saying yes and never having boundaries. So if I can do some reflection on that, that's going to help me to show up better for myself and others. And it's going to help projects to run a little smoother. So I leave that for you to screenshot and reflect on if you would describe yourself as a people pleaser or a yes person, just to avoid that drama triangle from any point where you have control. So the last thing I want to say here before I get to the final component of this video is just remind you that feelings and emotions, they are information. As soon as we feel something or recognize an emotion, we should be aware that it's information, and feelings and emotions give us information about our needs. So if I'm feeling irritable, angry, frustrated, upset, annoyed, any of those things that come along with problems that happen in conflict or groups, I'm going to recognize, going all the way back to my first video, the states and traits, that I might be in a state of alarm or alertness or some fear, that I don't feel protected or safe with respect to what's happening. And I got to figure out what I need here. Do I need time, space, more communication, more clarity? Do I need to be heard? What is it that I need, and how can I work to have that heard by the person that I'm working with? So I got to figure out how to communicate clearly and kindly. Or maybe there are needs I need to meet for myself. I need to take better care of myself, set more boundaries, and be able to show up smoother and calmer and just more collected for group projects. Lastly, I want to talk to you a little bit about how we get to resolution. And this is really just a summary of all of the things I've talked about in this part 2. So step 1, notice the signs and symptoms of conflict. That goes back to where I started. How does it show up in states and traits? Clarify issues or problems. We have to be online and in our thinking brain. So how do we work to calm our nervous system and ask the right clarifying questions? Explore options for problem solving, invite others to bring options to the table, decide on what to do, reset and forget, right? Implement the actions and evaluate. So how did that go? And if it went well, how can we repeat this in the future when we face problems? Because the inevitable nature of life is more problems are going to come up. And the more we climb this ladder with success, the more we train the body that we can face problems, be resilient, and move forward and face more problems and be more resilient and continue to move forward. So I'll leave you with that in addition to a little reflection you can also do if you recognize that any one of these steps is difficult, or even if you work through them all and you realize that was a success. After you work through a problem, whether it was a success or a failure, ask yourself, what do I need to start doing? What do I need to stop doing? And what do I need to keep doing in order to achieve success with problem solving and managing conflict? So these are just 3 really quick questions in reflection of my work with other people that can help me to move forward and continue to see growth in communication, conflict, problem solving. So that's it for part 2. I look forward to seeing you in part 3, where we're going to talk a little bit more about accepting critical feedback, which can be a component of communication, conflict, and problem solving. And then we'll land with our last video talking about all of the strategies that can be applied to all of these things that will help to continue to build our strength and resilience. So we'll see you in a few minutes or whenever you join us for part 3.